And hello, everybody, and good afternoon. My name is Johnny. I'm a white male wearing a black t-shirt with white AirPods in my ear, sitting in my home office, surrounded by a couple of my favorite movie posters, including the one that's most prominent, Spike Lee's movie, Do the Right Thing. And hopefully that's something that we can do today, is do the right thing and try and give all of you an insider's guide to the job search. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. I'll share it up there, and hopefully if it's not sharing, one of the team can let me know. And again, we will provide access to these video recordings and to the slide deck that I'm going to be using here to anybody who wishes to have it, and hopefully that will help you. So let me tell you a little bit about myself and my background, why I'm speaking to you today. So I am an ex-recruiter. I started recruiting just after leaving university back in the late 90s and set up Social Talent with my co-founder about 10 years ago. And we are the world's largest learning platform for hiring. So we teach organizations, recruiters, managers, leaders, HR people, how to hire talent, how to onboard talent, how to find talent as well, and used by some of the biggest companies in the world like IKEA and Uber and Intel, IBM, and tons more around the world. So we teach call it the other side of the equation, how to do hiring. How do you find talent, manage applications, attract people, interview them, and put them through the process? So what I want to give you is the insider's view of what that looks like. And we have probably trained several 100,000 people around the world to do this. And chances are that if you are in a process trying to find a job today, you're going to come across one of the managers or recruiters that has been trained on social talent. So hopefully these insights will be useful in terms of using our insight to help you find a job. What are we going to cover today? So what we'll cover is, first of all, where to search for a job. I'll give you an overview of the main tools and websites to use and how to use them best. We'll talk about your CV and your online profile and how that fits into the job search, what the interview process typically is, and who will you likely meet in that interview process, how to prepare for the interview, and then to kind of think about finding a job as a job. And I'll explain that a little bit more and give you some tips, and then we'll recap on that. And we're going to have hopefully plenty of time for any questions and answers towards the end. But if you have a question as we go along, myself, Claire, and team will be checking out the chat. I'm more than happy to dig into any questions you have. Likewise, if you have any questions you'd like to ask to me or the team offline, I'll just go back and recap to say my contact details are listed there, my Twitter account, LinkedIn account. Please do connect or reach out to me. I'm happy to give you any one-on-one responses if that can be of help. So let's talk about where to search. I had to do some updated research, as it's been some time since I personally did a job search, but I wanted to understand, if I was seeking a job today, like some of you may be doing, or others in your own network or family might be doing, where should you look? Because that's quite important. So here's some data on the top 5 places to find a job online in Ireland. And the #1 site by a mile is Indeed. So hopefully many of you are already familiar with Indeed, but Indeed.ie or Indeed.com, which will redirect to the Irish site when you type it into your web browser, or the Indeed app if you download it from your mobile browser. And that is the #1 marketplace for jobs, not only in Ireland, but actually in the world. It's the #1 career site in Ireland, the #1 career site in the world, and it's the 44th most popular website in the world, which is pretty amazing, to be honest with you. And it's a great resource. And I'm going to focus my attention on Indeed, because chances are if the job isn't advertised on Indeed, it isn't advertised. But the other 4 places to consider looking to broaden your reach are LinkedIn. While it's not technically only a career site, it's technically a professional social network. It is probably the #2 site to go to for jobs in Ireland, but also the world. And it's the 18th most popular site in the world. Because of course, LinkedIn isn't just about finding a job. There's a lot more involved there. And I'll show you how LinkedIn can be connected to a job search on any of the other sites as we go through this session. And then the other 3 sites to consider are jobs.ie, irishjobs.ie, and Glassdoor. all good sites. Jobs.ie and Irish Jobs are ones that you're probably most familiar with. They've been around the longest in Ireland. Jobs.ie is the #3 site in Ireland. Irish Jobs is the #4. They're actually owned by the same company. And they typically offer slightly different focus. Irish Jobs traditionally was what you might consider more white collar office type roles, professional roles, and Jobs.ie was everything. That's blurred. I don't think there's much of a distinction anymore between them from a job seeker point of view, except the fact that Jobs.ie is more popular than Irish Jobs. It's 193 in just websites in Ireland, and 258 is Irish Jobs. And the fifth one is Glassdoor. Glassdoor, you might not know, is a site for jobs. It's where you'll go to research a company, see what their current staff think of them, how they're rated. But you can also uncover tips from existing employees, but also previous applicants as to what the interview process is, what kind of questions they ask, what to expect at an interview, and even what kind of salaries they offer. And Glassdoor is actually owned by Indeed. So they are also the same company. And it's probably the #5 career site in Ireland. You can see jobs advertised directly. But again, if you're searching on Indeed, you're probably covering most of the jobs that will be on Glassdoor. But Glassdoor can give you something else to add value to your job search. That just gives you a bit of an insight in terms of what the career sites are. We don't have time to go into each one, so let me give you a focus on the most popular one, which is Indeed. I'm going to skip our poll questions just for a second, because I wanted to give you, our polls unfortunately aren't working as well as we would have hoped today. So let me go into what success looks like. And before we go into the job search, it's important to understand what a typical job search looks like. And the data suggests that to get a job offer, which is obviously the goal for most of us when we're doing a job search, you'll likely have to conduct 12 separate interviews and send us out as many as 150 applications. So when you sign up to doing a job search, you're signing up to a lot of rejection. Okay, and that's really important to understand up front, because it can be really difficult for many of us. Rejection is something none of us like. Nobody likes rejection. Nobody likes negativity. And you may have dealt with a lifetime of negativity and difficulty. And so when you go into a job search, it's important to understand up front, I think, you're going to get a lot of this, but it's okay. It's not you. It's just the process of applying for a job. You might get 149 rejections, but that's average. That's quite normal. So if you're sitting there with 10 rejections and thinking nobody wants to hire me, you haven't applied to enough places, because on average, you're going to have to apply to a lot of companies to get that one job offer. And doing 2 interviews isn't likely to lead you to a job offer either. You're probably going to have to get on 12 Zooms or Teams calls or whatever it takes these days to get a job offer. So understand the odds and embrace them. Know that it's not you. Know that you have to play the numbers game to a certain degree. Of course, we'd like it to be better and like the odds to be stacked more in our favor. And you can do that by being smart, but you should understand that this is normal for a job seeker. It's not a very efficient process. I don't like the fact that it takes 150 applications. Nobody does. But know that it's not you. It is just part of the process of finding a job. It's not very effective at the moment, and hopefully it will get better over time. So when you're searching for a job, and again, focus on Indeed to start with, a couple of tips to help you get started here. Definitely recommend you create an account and upload your CV. There are 2 sides to Indeed's product from an employer's perspective. There is the ability to advertise a job and receive applicants, and pretty much all companies hiring will use Indeed to do that. And the other side is that they can search the database of CVs of people who've uploaded their CV there. And sometimes you won't run the ad, you'll just search the database, because you're going to get so many applications. Maybe you don't have the resources to actually respond to them or even review them. So rather than putting an ad out and getting 1,000 CVs sent to you, you search for just the CVs you want. And that's why having your CV on the Indeed database is so important, because it opens up a marketplace that may not be otherwise open for you. So I definitely recommend you create the account and upload your CV. If you don't have one prepared, there is a process on Indeed that walk you through filling out all the information to create a CV. I'm using air quotes as I speak, create a CV digitally on the Indeed platform. Definitely recommend you do that. And when you're thinking about your CV in a general context, when you apply for jobs on any of these career sites, or you send it directly to a company through their website, you need to know that your CV, in almost all circumstances, will initially be scanned by a computer. It's scanned by some sort of software that is quite literally just matching keywords. There are requirements and keywords that the company is looking for, and they need to see the same keywords in your CV. And oftentimes, considering the amount of applications each job typically gets, you're going to get automatic screening. So you might get a rejection email and they've never actually, as in they being the person, has never read your CV. A machine has scanned it and deemed you unsuitable. And sometimes it's because you just aren't suitable, you don't meet the criteria. But oftentimes it's just because the words you chose to use in your CV aren't the words that they were looking for, but it's the same thing. So you have to be quite deliberate about how you write your CV. You might like to call yourself an account executive because you work in sales, and that's great. But if the word sales isn't there, it's more likely that the person who's looking to hire is looking for the word sales. They may not have considered the words account executive as a synonym of that role. Or for example, a receptionist versus an office administrator. Maybe it's the same job, but again, the employer's software is looking for one particular word and you've only used an alternate word, and it may not have the intelligence to try and match those up. So try and use several variants in your CV. You might have your job title, but you use what's called synonyms, alternative ways of saying the same thing in your description, perhaps, or in other titles. So think about the keywords on your CV. That's how you get found more often. And I'd also recommend you use the advanced search, which I'll show you how to do, and create search alerts, which I'll show you how to do. And you probably want to filter by direct employers first. I'll talk about the different stakeholders there between staffing agencies and direct employers and why you might use one over the other or how they work together. But let's just quickly look at Indeed's platform. So showing you on screen just some of the screenshots from using the software. When you first go into Indeed, it asks you to either upload your CV or build a new CV. If you have it ready, upload it. If you don't, start using the template to build a CV on Indeed. And when you do that, when you click Create Indeed CV, it walks you through all the information it needs, starting with your address, your contact details, your employer name, your education, all these different things. You will see as you go through the process on Indeed, quite regularly, you'll see a pop-up perhaps come up every once in a while saying, do you want to activate an alert for these jobs? So as soon as you run a search, it says, be the first to see new XYZ sales jobs in city or location that you've typed in. And it asks you to put your email address in and activate that search alert. I strongly recommend you use the search alerts, but don't do it just yet. Because if you do a search alert for a really broad search, like I have on my screen, I'm showing a search for an enterprise sales role in Dublin. Now that gives me, I think, 600 or 700 results. And every time a new job ad gets added to Indeed that matches those results, it will send me an email alert. Now, if I haven't been very specific about my search, I'm going to get inundated with emails and alerts for jobs that are mostly not what I'm looking for. So you want to make sure that when you do set up the alert, it's for jobs that are pretty closely aligned to what you're looking for, but there's still enough of them to send a decent volume to you every day or every couple of days. And that's where the advanced job search comes in. And that you'll find when you do this search, there's a Find Jobs blue button. And to the right-hand side of that, there's a piece of text saying Advanced Job Search. And that's what you want to click on. So it's to the right of the main Find Jobs button in Indeed. And when you do that, it opens up a bunch of fields where you can type in more specifically what type of job you're looking for. So for example, instead of just the jobs containing all these words, which is the normal, you can have an exact phrase, at least one of these words, with none of these other words, with certain words in the job title, from a specific company or companies, permanent jobs, contract jobs, part-time jobs, temp jobs, etc., etc. So there's great specificity here. And where you normally just search for these words anywhere in the job description. And remember, if I put in enterprise sales or office manager, it could be that I get a result saying reports to the office manager because the words are there, or that manager it's a sales manager and they say you will work in the office. That will still show up in my results. So think about telling this computer software what you really want. I'd recommend you definitely use the section called with these words in the title. So for example, here I might type in sales, so that I want the word sales to be in the job title, not just somewhere in the description. But you also might do a slightly more advanced search, which tells the system to give alternates. So I'll go back to the example I gave of sales or account manager. You can say, show me either by using what's called a Boolean operator, the word or in capital letters between the different words you're looking for. So I could say sales or account or selling or business development or other alternative words. And you can apply that to any sort of job title you're looking for. What are the other words people call themselves who do the exact same job as this? So for example, software engineer or software developer or back-end developer or back-end engineer. There might be alternate words that people use. And that will give you more choice, but still make it specific to what you're looking for. Words that are in the job title. On the next, scrolling down the page, you'll see an option to show jobs from, and the default is all websites. You can change that to just direct employer sites or just recruitment agencies. I'd recommend if there's lots of jobs, change it to just direct employers, because essentially the recruitment agencies are representing the employers. And if you can go direct, you're probably better off going direct. Not every job will be advertised directly. And maybe the recruitment agency has written it in a better way to be found. So if there aren't enough jobs to choose from, or you've run out, definitely expand that. But I would always go with the default of direct to the employer, as a lot of organizations are targeted on hiring more people directly. So if you apply through an agency versus going direct, they will have more of an incentive to hire you directly. So don't introduce obstacles unless you need to, unless there's no other choice, unless you run out of options. Try and go direct as much as possible. And in saying that, don't forget that it still often comes down to the quality of the recruiter. You might have a mediocre recruiter who works directly for the employer, who doesn't see the potential in your CV, yet somebody in an agency who's talked to you, met you, absolutely sees the potential and represents you to that employer in a better way and could have a better way of getting you an interview. So it's not as straightforward as avoid agencies. It's definitely not. But if there's enough jobs being advertised directly and you are still looking to apply to more jobs, I'd exhaust that avenue first, is more my point. So I'm going to break, just have a quick drink of water. When you run that search, it gives you hopefully a much better list of jobs that are, maybe 7 or 8 out of 10 seem right for what you're looking for. It's at this point that I would activate the search alert. So you get the option in the search results page, and I've highlighted it with a green box here of where you would activate that and put your email address in. And that's when you say, what, send me this search alert. So play around and get the search correct for you. Try those different fields, try different words until the search results are almost all suitable. As in a quick glance, you're going, yes, they're the jobs I should be applying for. And then activate that search alert as long as there's enough. If there's only 3 jobs, don't activate a search alert. It's too narrow. You want to expand it a little bit more. So when it looks like it's the right number and the accuracy is correct, I'd recommend you activate that search alert. And don't forget, you can have multiple search alerts for different job searches on somewhere like Indeed. So that moves me to what does your CV look like, and also the power of your online profile. So your CV is going to be covered in a separate session that we're going to be running in detail. But let me give you a very high level overview, because many of you want to start applying today. I don't want you to have to hold on until you do the CV session. But at a very high level, I'd recommend that your CV is 2 pages, no more, no less. It's kind of been a golden rule in Ireland or in Europe for some time. The US use a more 1-page format, but that's cramming it in tiny font, which isn't the most inclusive. I'd recommend 2 pages. And the general flow is your personal info at the start, your name, address, contact details, your education, and then your experience, and then your skills. Or you could switch it that you have your personal info, your experience, then your education, then your skills. It doesn't really matter if you switch education and experience, but you want the first page at the very least to show your current or most recent role in its entirety. So you might not get to the second page when someone scrolls down. So someone opens the CV and they can immediately see who you are, what you do. I'd also suggest you're maybe a little bit careful about demographic information you might provide, such as your full address. Is it necessary on a CV? Perhaps not. Don't forget that people have bias in all sorts of ways. It could be to do with your abilities, or it could be to do with perhaps, if you are somebody who has physical disabilities or cognitive disabilities, of course, that might not be something you highlight. But don't forget, bias exists elsewhere, right? It compounds. They might not like the school you went to, or they, might look at the area in the city or the country you live in, and unconsciously they have a bias against that area. So there's usually no benefit in sharing too much information like that. So be a little bit more careful about sharing too much information, and definitely don't share personal information like whether you have children, whether you are married. Again, none of that is relevant, and it is in fact something that employers do not want to see on your CV. Lead with your achievements when you're describing your current roles. Try and not make it all about your responsibilities. You, of course, need to include what are you responsible for, but tell me, why were you different as a sales manager or a sales associate or a teller at SuperValue? Tell me what you did that was above the norm, that was above average. It could be an achievement that you were awarded, or maybe that you worked there when the store opened first, which is a new experience. And you're, as an employer, you're looking at that experience going, that's going to be different to somebody who just worked there, during the middle years. When you open a store or you expand a store, it's a little bit different, perhaps, in the context, let's say, of a retail job. So tell me about what's different about you in this job. So lead with your achievements, but of course, include your responsibilities. And try and give context. Don't assume that everyone knows who the employer is. You might say, I worked for Social Talent and my job was this. Well, is Social Talent a company that has 1,000 employees or 10 employees? It makes a big difference. When you read about your role and responsibilities, I want to understand the context of the company you worked for, the team that you worked alongside. Was it an international role, or was it a domestic role? Was it just based in one city? Was it multiple cities? Like, tell me a little bit about that. And don't assume everybody knows who SuperValue is or Tesco is. Maybe the person who's been hired to do the recruitment has just moved here from Alabama in the US. They've never been to a Tesco, because they've only been to their local Spar. Okay, so even something as simple as that, don't make assumptions about what people do or don't know. Have a little bit of an explanation so that everybody is on the same page when they look at your CV. I'm going to ask you to think about this, and I'll share the answer. We won't run the poll. As I mentioned, the polls aren't working right now. But what is the main reason that employers might check out your social presence? I have 4 options here. Do you think it's mainly to look for info to support your qualifications for the job? Mainly to ensure you have a professional online persona? Mainly to see what other people are posting about you? Or mainly to search for reasons not to hire you? So you're more than welcome to put it into the chat. What do you think? Is it 1, 2, 3, or 4? What's the main reason? And the data here says 58% of employers will search online on your social presence for this particular thing. They will also, the other 42% will look for the other 3 things combined. What do you think it is? So Claire, I'm going to maybe ask you, what do you think it is? What's the main reason that employers will check out your social presence? Which of those 4 would you think?
To ensure you have, to look for support for your qualifications.
Hopefully it is, yes. They're looking to back up what they hope is your qualification, but they will also look for proof you have a professional online persona. There's a large percentage of employers who stated in surveys that if they can't find you online, they will discard your profile because they think you're hiding something, because their belief is everybody's online. Some will look to see what other people are posting about you, and some will just try to find reasons not to hire you. They'll look for reasons to exclude you. So it may not be fair but it's what people do. So it's important for you to understand, how are you representing yourself online in other places? And in that context, apart from your CV and the job boards, you need to have a look at your online presence. And I believe, regardless of your profession, your industry, the sector, or the level you are at your career, everybody these days needs a LinkedIn profile. Why? Well, it's easy to apply with LinkedIn profiles in a lot of cases on a lot of career sites these days. So that's great. It's a quick way rather than a CV, and a lot of employers prefer it. But also, when they Google you to look at your social profile, if you have a LinkedIn profile, it'll probably come up first. And that's a better thing to probably come up first than your Instagram or your Twitter or your TikTok, right? So, you know, how do you want to be represented? Well, LinkedIn is designed for professional representation. So I definitely recommend have a LinkedIn profile. We may cover a different day what it looks like to have a LinkedIn profile, what best practice looks like, but definitely have a look at your LinkedIn profile. You want that to be the first place they find. And you're going to need to build out your connections on LinkedIn. It's not just about having the profile, build out your connections and think about strategically, who are those connections? LinkedIn works better when you are connected to potential employers through 1, max 2 degrees of connectivity. So find super connectors. So I would be a super connector. I unfortunately have no connections left available on LinkedIn because there's a cap. I think it's 30,000 connections on LinkedIn is the max you're allowed to have. So if you send me a connection request today, I unfortunately can't accept it. But you know, find somebody who's a mega connector, who would probably be connected through 1 degree of separation to somebody else, and they'll be super valuable to you, super valuable. But employers will probably find your Instagram, they'll probably find your Twitter, your Facebook, your TikTok, your YouTube. So have a look, make sure you review them. You know, you might want to change your privacy settings so that only friends can see your Instagram photos, for example. You can change your privacy settings on Facebook so that only connected friends can see certain things. So just be sensible about what can be shown. Again, I do know employers are suspicious of people who cannot be found anywhere online. Which is perhaps wrong of them, but they are suspicious. So being found is good, and having good information about you, no harm, but you might want to consider what's on there, because some people, unfortunately, will use that against you. Let's talk about the interview process and who's who in the interview process. So who's who is good to know, first of all, because in recruiting, we use a lot of acronyms and words that you may not be familiar with, and it's worth knowing who you'll probably meet. So first of all, there's you. You are called the candidate. I remember working recruiting several years and saying to somebody, the candidate, they went, "Excuse me, what's a candidate?" And I was like, "Oh, that's you, the job seeker." And this person had been in their profession for 10, 15 years and never knew that they were called the candidate. And in recruiting terms, this is something we unfortunately do. We call everybody who's a potential candidate or applicant the candidate. And we never explain that to people. You know, they talk about the candidate should do this and the candidate should do that. And many of us know this word and we're used to it, but some of us just have never heard of this. You're the candidate. It's okay. Other people you're likely to meet, though, people like the recruiter, the hiring manager, what some call the TA, or talent acquisition executive, or the HRBP, or human resource business partner. These are all people you'll probably meet along your journey. And the recruiter could be the recruiter, and they could have that job title and they work for the company hiring, or they could be the recruiter who works for a third-party recruitment agency. The talent acquisition executive, or TA person, if they have that job title, that's really a recruiter, but just with a different name. And that usually means that they're the in-house person. They work for the company. But you could work with all of these different individuals throughout the process. It's good to know who they are. And again, if you hear that phrase, hiring manager, that means the person that you'll eventually report to. That's the person who actually has the vacancy, who needs the person to be hired into their team. The manager, the supervisor, the team lead, whoever that might be. They're the person with the pain. And they're typically the person who actually makes the decision here. All right, so everyone else is an influencer and they absolutely have a role to play. But ultimately, it's the hiring manager, and she decides who actually gets this job in the end, right? She usually has the ultimate sway in who gets hired. And what does our process look like? So most typically, the interview process you'll come across these days begins with either a phone or video screen. And when I say phone, it could be a Zoom, it could be something else. And I do recognize that this can be challenging for individuals who perhaps aren't comfortable at a first interview revealing something that could be a physical disability that they have, and they just aren't comfortable because an experience that perhaps hasn't gone well for them to open with that. I'd love if more employers were open and so on and so forth, and more experienced with individuals from all different backgrounds. Unfortunately, they don't all have the experience, and it may throw them to have someone who's not what they expect. And the world of Zoom, I think, sometimes has a negative effect, because previously we could have done a phone interview or something similar, and you're immediately, on screen with your home environment in the background, and that can be not great for everybody. It might not be what we all want, but be smart about how you do that. If you're not comfortable, that's okay. You might choose to perhaps do a phone screen, or you might say your camera's not working at the moment on your laptop. Are we okay to just to do a voice call on Zoom or Teams? Whatever you're most comfortable with. Certainly, starting off is up to you. And that could be also what's called an asynchronous interview. You might not actually do a live interview in a lot of circumstances where there's a lot of volume applications to the job, and they'll send you a link. You'll apply. They'll say, we'd like you to do an interview. Here's a link. Click on it and follow the instructions. And that is what's called an asynchronous video, where you will be asked questions, and through an app or a web link, you'll have up to 30 seconds or 60 or 90 seconds to respond to each question, recorded on your phone or on your laptop. And that might be a daunting experience, and you've never done it before. Do practice. Nearly all of those platforms, you're encouraged to do a practice, and you can do as many practices as possible. I definitely do the practices if you haven't done before, but it's nothing personal. It's just it's a scaled way for a lot of companies to hire. They'll use that video screen first. And so don't forget, though, you have a legal right to be screened in an alternate way if you don't believe that is the right way for you, or you're not comfortable with it for any reason whatsoever. By law, an organization has to provide an alternate to that process as well, if you wish to, once there's some sort of algorithm in the background, etc., that's doing the screening there. And it's certainly a very reasonable request for anybody. I know lots of people who just are nervous or uncomfortable with that screen. And I know we use a process like that for some of our hires. And we've had many people come back and go, I just prefer to do a call. Is that okay? And we just go, no problem at all. Let's schedule the call. You'll typically then do a recruiter interview. If you haven't already done a screening interview at the start, you might do a more in-depth interview with a recruiter. And again, let me explain the difference, because you might think that they're the same. Oftentimes, the screening call, our first video, might be what's called a sourcer, or a more junior recruiter. And really what they're trying to find out are basic things like, do you have the right to work? Are you available right now? Do you know what the salary is? Is that okay? Can I verify some basic information about you? Are you interested? What's your time frame? Just really basic questions like that. And they might dig into one or two probing questions. That produces typically a long list of talents that they pass on. And then from that list, a recruiter who's more experienced in hiring these types of roles may engage with you. Alternatively, you could go straight to the manager of the team, or you could go to a technical assessment. Again, it depends on the roles and the company's hiring. So this isn't a standard set process for everybody. So don't be afraid if the order changes slightly, or if it's slightly longer or slightly shorter. You may go straight to a technical assessment, because again, the company's decided that it doesn't matter how nice you are or lovely you are when we talk to you, if you can't get past the technical assessment, that we can't hire you. So they'll have decided what process is correct for them. And again, look at the technical assessment. Technical assessments, if you are offered them, we have seen data from across all our customers that depending on your background, you might not perform as well as a technical assessment as somebody else, even though you have the same knowledge or competencies as the person. It could be perhaps to do with a cognitive disability. It could be to do with a physical disability, but actually it can be to do with gender. We have a company we work with who hire thousands of software engineers every year. And they recognized last year in the software, the technical assessment wasn't putting through women through the process successfully at as high a rate as men. And statistically, there was no reason for that. But they discovered that by replacing that automated technical assessment with a guided technical assessment, women started passing the same assessment at a slightly higher rate than men even. And men were able to go through the same guided technical assessment. So there's a whole host of reasons why a process might not suit somebody. Don't be afraid to speak up and say, can I request an alternative way of being assessed? Good employers will absolutely work with you on that. And then it moves on to a couple of interviews and an offer. Typically, again, you kick the tires with people from the team, with the manager, maybe the manager's manager. Again, some processes are one interview, two interviews. Some are, you've probably heard the horror stories of 7 or 8 interviews, which is terribly stressful. And a lot of companies are trying to move away from that because the data suggests that statistically, the decision will not be any better after 4 interviews. So 3, 4 interviews gives you a good decision. But if you go to a 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th as an organization, statistically, you won't make a better hiring decision. You're actually wasting everyone's time, although it still happens. So hopefully you'll more uncover processes that are 2 to 4 interviews and nothing longer than that. And how do you prepare for that? Which brings me to my kind of my penultimate point here. How do you prepare for an interview? Well, you need to be prepared, first of all, for the discussion around the basics. And the basics, any good recruiter or screener is going to ask you about, your right to work in Ireland, if it's a job in Ireland. And just to be clear, they have no legal right to ask you your nationality. It's just your right to work is what they're looking for here, or what they should be asking you for. They might inquire as to why you're looking. So you can be ready for that question. So why are you looking? Why are you interested in making a move? Which might be, you can interpret this in different ways. You might interpret that as what's wrong with my current job? And maybe there's nothing wrong with your current job. So you interpret it as what would you move for different to what you're doing at the moment? Or you might be looking to explain why you're not working right now and looking to get back into the workforce. So have a reasonable reasonable explanation to that. And unfortunately, most employers prefer someone who's working right now than not working. But you can leverage that. I always say to somebody, you can always be working even if you're not in employment. I'm working on a project. I'm working on studies. I'm working with a voluntary organization. I'm working with my local charity, my library, with other colleagues on something else. So when I say working, they don't want to think of you as being at home and being what they might consider idle. Are you keeping busy through online, in-person activities, whether it's voluntary work, whether it's you're working with your family to do something to trace their genealogy for the last 3 months? Like, show that you're somebody who keeps busy is what I'm saying here. And it's much better than saying, I've been out of work for 6 months. And that's your only answer. So try and talk about what you've been doing for 6 months. I guarantee you haven't been just, idling around. You've been doing something. Be ready to explain all gaps in your CV. Basic 101 on a pre-screen is explain the gaps. It's okay if you have gaps. It's no problem at all, but you should be able to explain them. I was not working for 3 months because the economy was poor at that time. Like, for example, I look at CVs today, almost everybody last year has gaps because a huge number of people got laid off right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so people go, why were you out of work? You go, I got laid off the pandemic and didn't work for 4 months. Well, thanks for the explanation. Move on. Okay, but just be able to explain those gaps. And you may be asked early in the process about your current salary, your benefits and expectations. So if you're asked about your current remuneration, in different parts of the world these days, it's becoming illegal to ask that question. Different states in the US have brought this legislation in, different parts of Europe are beginning to bring it in. Currently, there's nothing to stop anyone asking your salary and benefits here in Ireland. And rather than saying, I'd rather not discuss that, which is your prerogative, but it is a negative start to employers. Be prepared to discuss your current salary, and don't forget to cover your benefits and all the kind of extra fringe benefits you may have got in your most recent role or current role, or redirect the conversation to talk about what you would accept and what's reasonable. So you might say, well, I'd rather not discuss my current salary, but let me talk about my expectations. That's fine too. So you can redirect if you're not comfortable, but you do give them something to focus on, because the job will have a budget. And if you're above the budget, there's nothing they can do about it. They can't hire you. So again, don't put yourself over a budget if you would really take a lower salary, but you might say something that's in a range. For example, I might take 30 to 35K, depending on factors such as the location, the working hours, the other benefits you have, and how attractive the role is. So you can give yourself flexibility that doesn't tie you to a specific number, and that's a good way to start. But also talk about how soon could you start. Today is not a great answer in most cases because it's a bit too keen. But again, what's reasonable? Could you start next week? Could you start at the beginning of next month? Or you might, again, answer with a question. How soon would you need someone to start? So rather than reveal your availability or lack of availability, turn it into a question. Or again, on the previous one, what salary are you on at the moment? If the company hasn't disclosed in their job at how much they're paying, you might stop and go, can I ask you first how much you're willing to offer for this job before I answer that question? So again, don't be afraid to answer a question with a question if it's reasonable. If they haven't disclosed the salary, then it's kind of rude that they're asking you first what salary you take when they haven't even told you what they pay. If they're asking you when can you start and they haven't said when they need someone to start, again, you can turn around and ask those questions, and you should be comfortable asking those questions. And I'm going to again ask Claire to get involved in answering this poll question. So on the type of interview you do, you might come across competency-based interview questions quite often. And I want to see, do we all recognize what a competency-based interview question is? So I have 4 examples here. What would you do if an angry and dissatisfied customer confronted you? How did you perform against target last year? Give an example of a time you handled conflict in the workplace. And where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? So Claire, which of those is a competency-based interview question?
Oh, you're really
put me on the spot now.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, what if I get this wrong? Perhaps 3 or 1.
So number 3 absolutely is that. And I deliberately put some that are slightly confusing. So a competency-based interview question, if you look at the difference between these 4, number 3, give an example of a time you handled conflict in the workplace, asks you to describe a true time in the past that represents the competency. So it's trying to dig into your past experience to understand, do you actually have the ability to do this thing, to have this competency? Whereas the first one is situational. What would you do if an angry and dissatisfied customer confronted you? Saying I would do something and actually having done it in the past are 2 different things. So the different types of questions is much more predictive of success to ask a competency-based question than a situational one. How did you perform against target last year? Well, it's just a data point. It's just a clarification of information. And where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? You do get asked this, but it's kind of a nonsense question. Be prepared for it, but it's neither situational nor competency nor terribly good. It's just a kind of default question folks answer. You're mostly going to have that competency-based type question, right? Giving an example from your past where you demonstrated a certain type of experience. And so that's the kind of main way I'd recommend you prepare for an interview. And the way that I've used all through my career, and I've advised thousands of people on how to prepare, and I've used myself to get jobs, is to think about your core strengths, right? What are your core strengths? And consider your core strengths in line with the requirements of the job or jobs you're going for. So is it that you're hardworking, you're decisive, you're a leader? What are your strengths? If you're not sure what they are, ask your former colleagues or current colleagues. Ask your friends, your family. Your family don't often give you the best answer. Your mom will tell you you're brilliant at everything. Okay, so it's going to pass the mom test. Moms are always, and fathers as well, and close relatives, very supportive. You maybe want to get somebody who gives you a more honest opinion. What are your strengths, real strengths? So understand them first and write them down. Then what I want you to do is think of 3 stories from your career where you've overcome a challenge of some description. And that could be when you were, starting a new job. That's often challenging for us. It could be when there was a change in your job, a promotion, a big event happened in work. So for example, the retail example I gave was we perhaps opened a bigger store and I was involved in the store opening. So think of 3 key moments in your career. Okay. And then I want you to think about each of those moments, and I want you to list the attributes you displayed in those moments. There will be many. You'll have an example go, oh, remember that time I took on that new big job and it was really difficult, but it was great. What attributes were required of you? Well, I had to think on my feet. I had to work really hard. I had to be creative. Like, list them out. And then what I want you to do is follow this 5-step process for those stories. I want you to organize and prepare those 3 stories in a very structured way. I want you to think about story by story. Set the scene. What's the background to the event that happened? What was the struggle or challenge in that story? What did you do? What was the outcome of what you did? And then what did you learn from that? And when you think about what you did, sometimes you did the wrong thing and the outcome wasn't good, but your learning was really important. And so when you think of those 3 stories, really the best way I've found to prepare for an interview is have 3 stories in your back pocket. Those 3 stories are well prepared in this structure. You're able to retell all those 3 stories from the set the scene, identify the struggle or the challenge. What did you do? What was the outcome? And what did you learn? And then what you do is you've aligned each story with the skill or strength that best demonstrates this. So again, you'll have each story actually demonstrates many skills, many competencies, but you'll pick, let's say, what are the core competencies you're likely to be asked about because the job description has described them. Teamwork. Which story is the best for teamwork? And you'll go, well, I know I'll tell story 2 if I'm asked about teamwork. Which one best displays leadership, best displays hard work, etc. And so you have in your head which story to go to, but all you actually have to remember are 3 stories, and make sure you go to interview with those 3 stories ready. And then no matter what competency-based interview question you're asked, you're going to answer with one of the 3 stories, and you're going to, based on the skill you think they're trying to assess, you'll pick which story is best for that. And probably 2 of the stories, or even all 3, will tell or describe your competency quite well or demonstrate it. But when you prepare, you're preparing a very focused amount of work, 3 stories from your career in a very structured way. It's much easier to prepare, and they're your stories, and therefore it's much easier for you to sell them with passion. I don't know a single person who hasn't done well by preparing this way for an interview. It usually works really, really well. That brings me to my final point. Finding a job is a job. You got to work on this. It doesn't happen by accident. This might sound like a fair bit of work, but I strongly recommend you do this. Keep a spreadsheet or a notebook of all the jobs you've applied for, and note your actions. Which ones did you apply for? Which ones came back and said yes, no? Which ones have you followed up? Like, track this stuff. It is a big piece of work to do. Follow up to each application. The lack of response doesn't mean no. Trust me, I work with tens of thousands of recruiters around the world. Sometimes they miss your application. They don't get to it. They're busy. It gets lost. Genuinely, it happens, right? So follow up to each application. If the job is really interesting and you really think it's worth doing so, I encourage you to connect with the recruiters or the manager of the team if you can find her online. And that's where something like LinkedIn works really well in combination with Indeed. You see a job in Indeed, it looks really interesting. You send off your application. You go on to Indeed, LinkedIn, you try and see if you can find the name of the recruiter who's recruiting for that, if it was listed, let's say, on the job spec, or try and figure out who might be the manager of that department and send a connection request to her, and maybe a message saying, hi, love the job you're advertising, thought I'd connect with you to say hi. Like, literally as simple as that. That extra piece of connection can really rise you above and elevate you above other applications. And following up is part of the interview. I love candidates who follow up because it demonstrates they have that extra ability to persevere, the extra willingness to go further than somebody else. So I might have 10 candidates who all look the same in terms of their experiences, pretty equal, and then 2 people make the effort to follow up. I'll probably prioritize those 2 people, all else being equal. So always think about that. And you won't get a chance to research all the companies you apply for, because going back to one of the earlier slides, you might have to apply to 150 jobs. But if somebody does come back to you to do an interview, do your research, look at their career site, look at their social presence, look at their Glassdoor reviews as well, and make sure you really understand who they are. Nothing worse than going into an interview and the person saying, so what do you know about us? And the candidate's going, well, I don't know. It immediately stinks of they're not serious about getting a job. They haven't taken the time. So you have to show that effort and thank everybody. I don't know whether it's, from growing up in Ireland, it was drilled into me by my parents, but always be polite, always thank people. Even if you're rejected, even if you get the no's, someone says they're not suitable, thank them. You will probably need to look for a job again in your career. And these things are remembered, all right? You build your network. It sticks out in recruiters' minds. We are humans too, right? We all have feelings. So oftentimes recruiters are considered the enemy because they reject so many people, but always make sure to thank everybody. And I'll leave you on this quote from Thomas Jefferson. I'm a great believer in luck, and I find the harder I work, the more I have of it. So it isn't just about, the experience you have. It isn't just about the market as it is. It's also down to how much effort you put in, the work and the personal touch you put into following up, connecting, and saying thanks to people. So I know we started a bit late, so we don't have as much time, but I have certainly some extra time if anybody has questions they want to ask or pose now.